Hard Talk, episode 54. We got a lot to cover today. We're going to go through everything that has happened this week in Bitcoin, in macro, and geopolitics. If you are new to the show, welcome. My name is Simon Dixon. I spent over 2 decades obsessing over the topics of Bitcoin investing and monetary reform. And it seems like now is our time as we unearth everything that is happening in the fiat currency proof of weapons network that is driving us closer and closer to global war. At the same time as us transitioning to a world of Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, and central bank digital currencies. And if you will entertain me, I would love to guide you through that transition as I have been ever since over 2 decades or so. So let's jump right in with this week in Bitcoin. Now, the main topics that we're going to be covering today is I want you to understand what BlackRock and what Venezuela are doing with Bitcoin at the moment so you can make better decisions. Because here's the reality. For those of you that are new to my content, you will know that throughout the entire history that I've been covering Bitcoin from way back in 2011, when it was $3 and I spoke at the first Bitcoin conference and uploaded it to this very same YouTube channel, you will know that every single cycle, there are people that would love you to sell your Bitcoin because you are valuing your wealth in a fiat currency shitcoin on a proof of weapons network and falling for what the media is telling you. And behind the scenes, there is always people that are accumulating the hardest form of money, digital gold, let's call it, but much better with complete auditability, complete ability to trace transactions as you send them in a pseudonymous way and be able to have complete divisibility. Every country and every company and every individual will have to get on board in order to protect themselves from the central bank digital currency world that our fiat currency is taking us, because every country has been occupied by the central banking system. The central banking system was engineered and designed in order to create wealth inequality, fund wars, and take money away from you by destroying your wealth through inflation. And if you have not figured that out yet, then you better start figuring out. So if you're enjoying this, then please do share, please do retweet, please do like, please do subscribe, and do me a favor, put a comment in any of the either X or YouTube. So whilst you may be worrying about your Bitcoin crashing if you are new to the 4-year cycle from $74,000 to $54,000, understand that you need to value your wealth in Bitcoin, because there is a bunch of BlackRock funds and various other traditional finance funds and Vanguard funds and Fidelity funds that would love to buy your Bitcoin and take it from you, because the inflows are coming in. They would much rather you wrap your Bitcoin, sell the Bitcoin that you own, and send it over to Coinbase so that BlackRock can wrap it in a share and create a paper version of Bitcoin, because there may be some tax benefits for you as we transition to people owning their own Bitcoin to BlackRock holding your Bitcoin. So they will be buying it. And at the very same time, people are having their fiat currencies destroyed. We're going to go into the situation in Venezuela today and how they are using Bitcoin as a political means in order to try and stabilize their reserves as the world's largest reserve holder of oil supplies that has been taken down by the financial weapons of mass destruction that are inflicted upon any country that does not bow down to the hegemony power of the US dollar, backed by the Federal Reserve and the deep state, that makes you think that you're voting for your politicians on the Republican and Democrat side. But little have you known that if you follow the money, it's already decided who gets in, as they pretend to export that democracy through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And you think that they are doing that, but they don't care about the countries that don't have massive oil reserve or massive resources in order to exploit. Those ones don't need democracy. But the ones that do have massive oil reserves, they need some democracy. And of course, they need the hegemony power of the Federal Reserve and the United States dollar exported through the International Monetary Fund to send the economic hitmen into making you believe that you are doing good for those countries. And so let's dig into a little bit of what's happening. So for those of you that are new to it, you may not have known what happened to Venezuela on the last halving cycle. So what came out this week and what's new this week is that President Maduro, and by the way, I'm not endorsing any government. I'm not endorsing any leaders. I want people to be free from governments by owning their own money, spending their own money, and being able to free themselves from the oppression of central bankers so that when you are free from it, you can make a difference in the cause and the struggle in your own country against your own central bank and your own governments. When external forces come in, you are asking the US to take your oil reserves. And so whether that leader is a dictator or not, good or bad, regime change only leads to one result: the complete devastation and destruction funded by the military-industrial complex and the complete pillaging of all of the resources of that country. It does not lead to democracy. It only leads to occupation by central banks. What we need, we the people, is to free ourselves from the central banks so that we can build a wealth effect and we can influence our politicians into reforming through an internal struggle in order to make our countries better. But Maduro came out, again, don't see this as an endorsement of Maduro. I just want all countries to be able to free themselves. We have to get back to the world of crypto. What does Maduro mean? Well, Venezuela had a disaster with crypto. So for those that weren't around, let me enlighten you. So firstly, they really tried to stop the people from Bitcoin mining. And there were different pockets of Bitcoin mining that was used and utilized. And I was around with different communities. I even invested in a company called AirTM that was helping the people build use Bitcoin and stablecoins in order to have a dollar denominated account. And obviously through financial sanctions, or many of those companies get taken down as America wants to implement a regime change into that country in order to destabilize and topple those governments and implant their own so that the resources can come over, and through the debt IMF contracts, American contractors can take over those resources, and the military industrial complex can have a shot and boost to their share price by forcing the money to come back into America, leaving the country crippled by debt, just like the mercantilism policy of the British empires, the French empires, the Dutch empires, the Spanish empires, and the Portuguese empires. But this is done through covert mechanisms and covert regime changes. But in 2018, if you don't know the situation, it's always the civilians that suffer. The governments, they get to use those resources to their favor, and the regime change gets to pillage those resources out and get the central bank to print money. And when you inject enough dollar-denominated debt into Venezuela, you end up having to print and devalue that currency in order to try and devalue some of that debt. And if you're on the right side of the proof of weapons network, you're okay. If you're on the wrong side, your wealth gets destroyed. So in 2018, Venezuela had 1.7 million% inflation. We're complaining about 3% inflation. It went up to 10%. Imagine 1.7 million%. If you cannot wrap your head around that, that is complete destruction of your wealth in order to send an economy into absolute chaos. And what was the trigger? IMF debt, US sanctions, in order to execute a regime change that ends up killing lots of people and not getting the desired regime change anyway, as we see time and time again. from all the other countries, Libya, Sudan, Lebanon, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that this is happening time and time again. All because of the Bank for International Settlements exporting its central banking system that now Satoshi Nakamoto gave us the technology to free ourselves from. So what did Maduro do? Well, prices were doubling every 4 days in 2018. In fact, since 2016, the cumulative inflation exceeded 8 million%. That is complete wealth destruction and theft through central banking and government devaluations through financial weapons and mass destructions. You can imagine what happens then. Well, the sanctions lead to destruction. The IMF debt leads to excessive printing and debasement of currency and revaluations that leads to corruption, that leads to destabilization. And then the people, what do? They flee their country across the Mexican and US border. And then everyone in America uses that in order to fudge their employment and inflation numbers so that you get tricked into thinking inflation is okay. It's okay to have this 2% systemic inflation that John Maynard Keynes justified to you when he designed the system for the Rothschild central bankers and designed the Federal Reserve System to be the slow confiscation of wealth, unconstitutional, to steal your savings and turn a capitalist constitutional country into a socialist country. And when the whole damn thing collapses, all of the assets end up going up to the top banks, and then the top bank ends up on the Federal Reserve balance sheet. And before you know it, you have communism on a blockchain called a central bank digital currency, when you can no longer profitably maintain the empire, just as would have happened in the transition from the British Empire to the American Empire. Oil reserves in Venezuela are larger than any other country in the world. So you can imagine why America is interested in exporting democracy to that country so that all the contracts from the IMF debt can make their way back into pushing up the stock markets of Americans, which are buying those stocks in order to combat that inflation, which is the largest wealth inequality that you are experiencing within America, leading to homelessness and people addicted to drugs in order to stay warm at night as you go through the monetary flows of the proof of weapons network. There is an estimated 300 million barrels, 300 billion barrels in Venezuela. But Venezuela's crude oil is different to how it is in Saudi Arabia and America. It is incredibly heavy, and so it relies, to international standards, and therefore it needs to work with various different investments to build the infrastructure in order to refine that oil to meet those international standards. And therefore, it must have an environment where it can work with either foreign investment or it can, build its own infrastructure play or growth economy. And it needs to work with international players in order to refine it. So it either works that way. And so the sanctions completely interfered into that flow. And then you end up with, essentially high pressure sanctions that create complete unrest and regime changes, resulting in the corruption from the political class trying to protect themselves from the very currency that they're destroying. And so it all becomes a self-inflicted loop where it attracts the most corrupt and the most, with those regime changes, and it ends up with those resources being taken over, just like the Dutch East India Company or the British East India Company did for the British Empire on the mercantilism economic model. Now, so what does Venezuela do that led to these sanctions and detoppling? Well, they decided that instead of taking IMF loans, they would take Belt and Road Initiative loans from China, and it would work with Iran in order to refine some of that oil. And so because America does not want anyone working with China and Iran because it may support those economies, then it has to fire these covert regime changes and use the full force of the Federal Reserve and the deep state mafia that controls that money in order to prevent it working with, of course, Russia instead, so that we can have a multipolar economy where the dollar competes with Bitcoin, probably an artificial intelligence-led CBDC from the World Economic Forum mafia that came from the Marshall Plans and various other things that came from the Cold War, when there was a genuine fight of ideologies between communism and capitalism. Well, guess what? Capitalism won, and then the Federal Reserve took it away and put us back to a trend towards communism. And so this destroyed the economy of Venezuela through these regime changes, and we watched it in real time, an American coup. Whatever you think of the Maduro, you know, it was used with X, it got involved in that, Elon got involved in that, and we saw that regime change that has been inflicted upon many of the North African rather, Central American and South American countries, to make sure that there is no unification of those countries to pull their resources together in order to have a more healthy, competitive environment that would lead to the very type of environment that is healthy for all of us to prevent us moving into World War III. So what did Maduro do? Well, he gave an absolute disaster. Rather than following the Bitcoin strategic reserve asset strategy, that means through honest means, you need to build an asset that frees you from your central bank. Instead, he launched a shitcoin called the Petro token. It was launched in 2018, for those of you that were not around, and it was meant to be backed by the country's oil and other types of, mineral reserves. But it was a scam, and it was a confiscation of wealth, and it was executed so badly. Why? Because they were building it on top of crypto without the level of transparency and the ability to implement and use Bitcoin for what it is meant to be used for. It got into shitcoinery. So what did Venezuela do? Because we know that it's not quite able to refine oil because the sanctions prevented it being able to put the infrastructure and get the investment. It started taking Belt and Road Initiative loans, and it started to basically use this oil-backed crypto to try and supplement the plummeting bolivar at the time, which the currency was destroying people's wealth. It was also a mechanism in order to try and circumvent US sanctions. But that's not going to work because you need a multi-structure in order for the global south to reunify around trading relationships and build an alternative corridor. Anybody that tries to do it through their own currency ends up with a zombie shitcoin that nobody uses, that nobody can actually trade with. So that's very different to what is being proposed as a result of the excessive sanctions in order to try and prevent competing forces across the global south. And so what they did is Maduro issued 100 million Petro tokens. He put the value of the entire issuance, if you take it together with the price of oil and the convertibility between the bolivar at the time, that gave this currency, the Petro, a market cap of approximately $6 billion. The Petro's pre-sale, which was run like an ICO, it started on the 20th of February 2028, and it ended on the 19th of March 2018. What am I trying to say? 2018 in the previous cycle. And allegedly, we were told by the Venezuelan government, because we really trust government's word rather than on-chain data, it was told to us that 38.4 million tokens were made available in the pre-sale. The government basically started the pre-sale, and it raised, we are told, $3.3 billion. So over 50% of that supply based upon it. Now, the tokens were meant to be convertible into oil at a fixed ratio, but nobody could even really see the on-chain data, and people started to question it because they weren't using the proof of work network, Bitcoin. They were using a proof, well, it was proof of work at the time, but the Ethereum, and then they decided to make a few shenanigans so that no one could really understand what was going on. So firstly, there was no independent audits that occurred, so we could not verify any of those claims. The white paper said that the currency that they'll be using was going to be built on top of Ethereum, but then they launched it, and then the white paper changed and said it's going to be built upon a shitcoin, which was NEM, which nobody is using. Obviously, there was a deal to be done there. And then they changed it to we're going to launch our own blockchain. And what did they use in order to launch their own blockchain? Well, they took a shitcoin and they forked the code and they created their own shitcoin called Dash, which was a fork of Dash. And then they said, we're going to use that in order to build our Petro because it has privacy built in so that nobody can verify any of the claims that we are making. And that is not the way to do it. So it is more corruption from corruption built upon shitcoins that forked the Bitcoin protocol, made changes, and did it where nothing can be verified. Then what did they do? Well, they announced that they're going to do a gold-backed cryptocurrency. And it was a televised speech given by Maduro. But there was really no clear guidance on whether the gold backing the actual coin was going to be, some of the already, the gold reserves that Venezuela had, because where were those reserves? Well, those reserves were held at the Bank of England, the bank that is controlled by the central banking system that wants Venezuela to build a debt-based Ponzi scheme so that it can have all of its resources slowly obfuscated through International Monetary Fund debt. And so Bank of England then said, we are going to seize those assets. So what the hell was backing it? Was it going to be some of the new mining that they were going to do? And it was going to be some of the new mineral wealth? Well, nobody actually knows because the whole thing was a scam. And it was constructed very badly. And this is how not to use Bitcoin in order to take back your freedom from the central bank that would much rather you have a debt-based fiat currency proof of weapons network Ponzi scheme where you agree to buy all of your military from the military industrial complex that is supporting the loan so that you can get excessive debt, regime change, and bow down to the hegemon power of the dollar. And so in August, let me see, what happened in August 2018? Maduro, he came out and said that he's going to have a currency reform. He's going to replace the previous hard bulvar, which was going through hyperinflation, with the sovereign bulvar. And the sovereign was going to be convertible into the Petro, and the Petro was going to be convertible into oil. And apparently this gold-backed oil currency or this gold-backed cryptocurrency that nobody understood or could audit. This is how not to do it. And this is what token issuers have been doing for years and years and years when they create new fiat currency but claim that they're new cryptocurrencies that can do things cheaper, faster, better than Bitcoin. And I think it was, let me look at my notes, one sovereign bulvar was worth 100,000 hard bulvars. So under the country's fixed exchange rate to the US dollar, the new currency devalued everybody's wealth and savings by approximately 95% overnight. This is what happens when you have a bad central bank combined with a corrupt government, combined with the US military industrial complex and the central banking system, combined with excessive IMF debt. You get a shitcoin salad of craziness and corruption that destroys and leads to everyone wanting to leave the country in order to flee for safety in America. And then you go through the American either legal immigration or illegal immigration system, so that the Federal Reserve can make you think that employment and inflation, which they're pretending that they're stabilizing, rather than figuring out how to get America, all of America's assets, to fuel the proof of weapons network and a larger and larger government. And every 4 years, you think you're changing the system by going further to the left and voting for the Democrats, or further to the right and voting for the Republicans. And they all end up part of the system because they need the lobby groups' political funding, when you realize that you're not exporting democracy and you don't really have a democracy. Our one hope is freedom of speech, which is why the most important thing is to protect freedom of speech, and everybody that tries to fight against that freedom of speech, for example, Julian Assange from WikiLeaks, ends up getting a financial blockade, Operation Choke Point 1.0, 2.0, and now Operation Choke Point 3.0, which is currently being executed with the coup of Binance in the crypto industry and the takedown of Silvergate and all of the crypto-friendly banks, including the Texas one right now that is currently being investigated by the Fed for supporting too many crypto companies, so that everything can transition over into more and more people wanting to do it with TradFi, so that you just buy it on the stock market through the players, through BlackRock, and that creates a crash of the price that makes you scared, so that you end up selling your Bitcoin and handing it over to somebody that understands the longer term game plan of Bitcoin is that there will only ever be 21 million of them. 20 million of them have already been mined. Millions of them have already been lost. And it is a race for every individual, every company, and every country to accumulate as many Bitcoin as they can as the 4-year cycle plays its way out. And everybody tries to fear you into selling your Bitcoin because you are stuck in the mindset of the fiat currency proof of weapons network, valuing your wealth in dollars rather than valuing your wealth in digital hard sound money, when you realize that every single asset is crashing relative to Bitcoin. And every single asset is crashing relative to gold, not because gold is increasing, but some central banks are accumulating that to back their cryptocurrencies in the future when they do it properly, and they do it through a competing force of countries being able to trade with each other as well. Well, anyway, you could exchange one-to-one for oil. It was meant to be an oil-backed currency. The concept is great. The execution is awful. The corruption is awful. And the whole thing collapses. I think they fixed the sovereign bolivar to the Petro. And now you've got convertibility into gold, convertibility into oil, with no exchange for anyone to convert, but you have to go to the government in order to do it. And the government doesn't allow you to do it. And you've got it built upon a privacy-centric fork of Bitcoin called Dash, in a model where no one knows what the hell is going on. So the market value of oil, even in at its peak, I think it went to, where are we? When it was convertible, the market value of oil was about $60 per barrel. In its peak, that went up to about $149 per barrel. And still Venezuela suffers hyperinflation, gets wrecked, and gets on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network to be destroyed, to be pillaged, and to suffer regime change that will always lead to more problems for the Venezuelan civilians, making them leave their country. Just so you know as well, another little trick, the Petro was 100% pre-mined by the Venezuelan government. So there was no more coins, which means it had a complete fixed supply. It tried to replicate some of the properties of Bitcoin. And then during the ICO, the tokens could only be purchased from the Venezuelan government with Russian rubles, with Bitcoin, with Nem coin, a shit coin that nobody's using, And with Ethereum, that at the time was a proof of work network, but is now converted into proof of stake, and has now been classified as a commodity, which makes it valuable for becoming the backbone and the network of central bank digital currencies and stable coins and tokenized securities, which brings us into the BlackRock plan. And so that would likely, under that system, if anyone purchased it with Bitcoin, led to that wallet address being sanctioned by the US, because immediately the United States Department of Treasury, they came out and they said anybody that purchases from this ICO, that this Venezuela ICO is a violation of US sanctions. And so purchasing it could lead to your wallet address entering into the OFAC sanctions list. And Trump immediately came out and launched an executive order prohibiting anybody, any American people, from purchasing the Venezuelan bank cryptocurrency that was so-called meant to be backed by oil. And so guess what? In January 2020, Maduro basically released it so that it became mandatory for anyone to pay with Petro if they wanted to get any government issued documents. And so the individual people that wanted any of their government documents needed to use the Petro, even though there was no exchange for it and it wasn't done in a Bitcoin way or a decentralized way, so that you can put your documents on there on the government, which is essentially a form of digital ID so that they can track that connected to an identity. And if you wanted to get airplane fuel to leave the country as an international, any of those airplanes, you had to use the Petro. So it became sort of like what WorldCoin is right now, where the founder of ChatGPT is asking people all around the world to put their iris into a little iris football, so that all of that data can be transported into the algorithm, which makes its way over to the power network like Israel that is building all of the military industrial complex, artificial intelligence that is coming from that new military industrial complex world that is being built, where they have automated machine guns in Palestine right now on their walls so that you can have occupation as a service that can then be exported and sold to the most oppressive regimes, pretending that they are exporting democracy by building all of this technology that occupies those states. And what happened in January 2024, just as the Bitcoin ETF was launching, well, the tokens were shut down by the Venezuelan government and any remaining holdings were liquidated immediately after those alleged $3.3 billion and the rest that happened in the second round. What happened? Well, it was done on the Dash shitcoin code that nobody can verify. And so therefore, it could have been obfuscated and all of that money destroyed, even if it ever was created in the first place, because it was probably just the left hand trading with the right hand in order to make some illusion that this was something that was ever going to work. And so obviously last month, the US officially declared that Edmundo Gonzalez, they said that they don't recognize Maduro and that he is the official election winner of the Venezuelan presidential election against Maduro. Now, we don't know what happened with that. There was all sorts of corruption allegations, but just around the corner in Guatemala, they decided to put their votes on the Bitcoin blockchain through ordinals or whatever it was done to put it on the Bitcoin blockchain. I didn't quite look deep into the technology, but that prevented this very same thing from happening, where when they demanded recounts of votes, they looked to the pegging of those votes onto the blockchain so that no recounts were needed. And the integrity was maintained. Will they do that in America? Well, we do not know, because those ballot votes are probably the ones that will decide who the deep state and the Federal Reserve needs to be in charge of America. And as we know, that Trump took $100 million with the condition that he would annex the West Bank and hand it over to Israel. And in the geopolitical section of today, we'll cover the atrocities that are happening right now. And by the way, Americans are being murdered and shot in the face by the Israeli Defense Force in the West Bank that has no Hamas and no connection other than simply a settler colonial movement in order to take Palestine away from those in the West Bank that are doing a resistance right now. And that has nothing to do with anything that happened on October the 7th. And this is being weaponized. And hopefully you're not going to fall for it. We'll go through a little bit more in the geopolitical section. So what happened to Venezuela? Well, Venezuela said we're now going to formally join BRICS and we'll be making our way to the October conference in BRICS. And the BRICS currency, which hopefully will be designed in a good way. I do not hold my breath for that. But hopefully this will be designed in a correct way in order to keep corrupt governments accountable to the maths and code of the Bitcoin blockchain, or more likely they'll use the proof of stake methodology of the Ethereum blockchain, and the traditional financial institutions will fight in order to own the stakes of Ethereum so that they can rebuild the Federal Reserve, but using modern day technology, and transition to a world of central bank digital currencies as the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme unwinds itself and all the small banks get gobbled up by the larger bank, and the larger bank gets gobbled up by the Fed, and the Fed issues your balance with a central bank digital currency. But if it decides to allow this regime change, then you know what follows. An IMF dollar-denominated or special drawing right denominated loan and support from the World Bank, and an agreement that that loan is tied to spending all the money back into America with a good dose of hyperinflation. And so that instead of those loans being repaid, the International Monetary Fund can say, you know, all of that oil, let's make sure that it is done and exploited with American contractors to prop up the American stock market, so that those that accumulate assets by borrowing excessive debt and getting on the right side of wealth inequality are able to beg the Federal Reserve to push up their stock market prices by decreasing rates, as everyone that owns stocks and real estate is doing in America right now. So they will be forced to hand over their oil under that regime change, take the IMF loans, and Maduro will be implemented into a regime change, most likely, unless Maduro decides to fight back against that through BRICS, and that BRICS cryptocurrency puts some accountability to the Venezuelan government by using the Bitcoin blockchain, or it could be that whoever controls the stake of the Ethereum blockchain will be used. Of course, we will always update you as we transition to this world, as I have been for decades now, as we entered into this journey. Right. So Maduro came out and he said there's an arrest warrant for the opposition presidential candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, and America supports it. And very, very interestingly, I shared a video on my X. If you're not following me on X, make sure you follow me. That's where I give all the real-time updates. And also, because YouTube doesn't want to show us any love, they don't like the content and the things that I talk about, I'm completely shadow banned. But X, I'm getting more and more people watching my videos, while on YouTube, the subscribers are going down. But I would like you to do me a favor. I would like you to make sure that you like, comment on YouTube, because all of the journey that I documented was on YouTube ever since the first Bitcoin conference and pre-Bitcoin, when I was sharing all the monetary reform presentations. So hopefully the channel doesn't get taken down. In order to prevent that, please do subscribe, please do like, please do add a comment there and let me know. And I read those comments and I will reply to those comments as well. But we had an announcement from the opposition leader. Remember, this is not an endorsement of Maduro. I believe every country should have their struggle, and I believe that every country should be able to free themselves from the intervention of the central banks in order to use their resources for their own people and use a Bitcoin strategy, just like El Salvador is, to grow their economies, free themselves from outside forces, and we can all get on and trading with each other nicely rather than raping and pillaging through the economic hitmen at the IMF. But an opposition leader, her name was Maria Corina, sorry if I'm butchering the name, Machado, Maria Machado, sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but she proposed using Bitcoin as the national reserve asset for Venezuela. Congratulations, you are starting to learn. Every country can go over to the Bitcoin 2024 recorded presentations and understand the strategy that I put forward on this YouTube channel that Michael Saylor presented around the countries that can free themselves using the RFK strategy that was presented at Bitcoin 2024. This is much better than the crypto shitcoin strategy that Maduro put forward with the Petro Ponzi scheme with zero transparency. So what did she say? We envision Bitcoin as part of our national reserves. Remember what El Salvador's doing, buying one Bitcoin every day in order to free itself from the IMF and the Federal Reserve and the Belt and Road Initiative loans and the Bank of England, which pretends to be concerned, which is the bank that started the whole debt-based Ponzi scheme that leads to all the wealth inequality. And because she wants, or she is saying that she wants to do it to help rebuild what the dictatorship stole. Now, here's the important point. El Salvador publishes the Bitcoin wallet address, and everybody can see that the El Salvador government holds those Bitcoin, and if they get moved, you get transparency backed by the electricity of the proof of work network, and then they can build a mining industry in order to incentivize the development of those resources to repurpose oil, natural gas, and have gold as a backup strategy to the digital internet strategy with Bitcoin, as I've covered in previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, where I interview the next Bitcoin presidents. Make sure you go back to those if you want to learn. This allows the governments to be held accountable, transparent, and they can't use those Bitcoins in order to fund wars. If they want to do defensive wars rather than aggressive wars, they have to raise finance through the bond market based upon the backing of those strategic reserve assets with no dependency upon the Bank of England to hold those resources and gold for you. So you end up with the Bank of England confiscating those assets, or you get corrupt politicians that don't audit, like the Federal Reserve, that never gets audited, and you don't know what happens to those gold reserves. You use the blockchain in order to be able to see that and hold the governments to account. And as always, the only loser of all of this is civilians that end up becoming refugees as their entire life savings gets taken away from them from the proof of weapons network. And if they can't escape in time, they end up in competing governments, military coups d'etats that are being supported by the deep state. And then we get told that the Christians and the Muslims and the Jewish people are all fighting to each other, and it's all our fault. And we're led to believe in these psyops, and the media perpetuates the message of exactly what is supported by the proof of weapons network. And so this is what we have seen in Venezuela, 100% a US-sponsored coup, as we have seen 65 times documented in the book, US covert regime change since World War II and the Cold War. I'm going to be covering a lot more on this. So if you are not a member of simondixon.com and create your free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where I give newsletter updates every single week. And I'm also going to be doing my next video series on how to prepare for the Great Depression of the 2020s, where I invest live, free for everybody. And I put that on my in the membership portal. If you haven't got a free login to that membership portal, make sure you head over to simondixon.com and get yourself that free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal so that you can get these real-time updates. So what is happening with the declaration of this? Well, it could be decided by Bitcoin. And so the leader that decides to use the Bitcoin blockchain rather than the shitcoin blockchain that you can't audit or use correctly could be the one that wins the race. So whichever leader does that transparently, because Bitcoin has a rule, it's called trustlessness. It's backed up by maths and code. It is geopolitically and strategically diversified with the proof of work network around the world, so that no corrupt politician, no corrupt individual, and no corrupt company can get away with their crimes without creating an immutable record, so you can finally hold that government accountable to what they are saying, just like El Salvador and Bukele is holding their country accountable to their Bitcoin strategic reserve asset strategy. So moving on, the FBI has warned that North Korea is trying to hack and steal US crypto behind the Bitcoin ETFs and the funds that are being custodied with Coinbase. I think this is a new, interesting strategy. Either this is complete propaganda to fear you, either this is complete propaganda to scare you into not buying Bitcoin so that other funds can buy that Bitcoin when the price corrects, as it always does, like we are experiencing right now. Or this is a new stock market attack vector that can be used by the deep state and through currency wars. So essentially, a government actor can try and penetrate the custodian behind the Bitcoin ETFs. And this could create a new attack vector when BlackRock is pooling together and Fidelity are pooling together through the ETFs. This is why we self-custody, by the way. So one of the things that I always teach on my Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, which I'm going to be doing the next one next year. It's a free program. And when I do that program, we teach you how to self-custody, because it's all good. And then protect yourself with some ETF in case you lose your coins and various other things. You can use it for risk management. But the most important thing is to be able to self-custody so that you can protect yourself from these attack vectors that happen when we pull together lots of Bitcoin. Now, fortunately, Bitcoin is a proof of work network, which means it doesn't matter who holds them. It's not like proof of stake where whoever holds them controls the network. I don't want to go deep into that, but this is why it doesn't matter if government agents or BlackRock or they hold the Bitcoin, because they can't control the network. And that's why it's important to have proof of stake, but you want self-custody. And that's something that it takes a little bit of learning, but we'll get you set up with self-custody. And that's something we do in order to try and ensure that more and more people have their own Bitcoin, because that is the key of protecting yourself from the proof of weapons network so that you can combat the inflation of the Federal Reserve. And hopefully, if Bitcoin does what it is designed to do, end up with a wealth effect based upon Austrian economics and sound principles as well. So remember, Bitcoin fixed the need for an ETF already, but they want you, and BlackRock wants you to put your Bitcoin with them. And that is just an obvious business strategy. And so, crashing the price of people that hold it in self-custody, hopefully that won't scare you, because it looks like the inflows into the ETF are still increasing as the price is going down. So those seem to be people that have already decided to buy Bitcoin through the ETF, those large financial institutions. Maybe it's retail. I think more retail might be doing self-custody. We shall see. But this is why the importance of proof of work versus proof of stake, as it gets more and more held by these larger financial institutions. So, this is similar to when BlackRock gets voting rights by controlling people's shares through ETFs, and then they get to try and exert like an ESG narrative, or the latest one, DEI, diversity, equality. What's the other I? I'm even thinking, getting some brain freeze here. When he tries to exert those forces in order to make societal change, because everyone's giving up their stocks and their voting rights to BlackRock as well, and then lobby groups are used in order to exert that influence, that goes into the Aladdin AI algorithm, and then that goes back to the technology within Israel that is being used to power these the AI-powered military-industrial complex, as we usher into a world where humans, because they know the truth, are no longer willing to fight wars, and so drones will do it for us as well. And hopefully we get open source artificial intelligence that learns the truth based upon everything we are feeding the algorithm. And that's why I will continue to go live every week, because at least I want the truth as I understand it to be fed into the algorithm, which will make up the artificial intelligence in the future. And we want it to be good artificial intelligence, open source, rather than closed source, controlled by an agenda that is trying to get you those wars fought over bad means, just like the Federal Reserve proof of weapons network that was created from the Bank of England proof of weapons network. And so remember, ETH is likely to become this settlement layer for stablecoins, central bank digital currencies. And that is why BlackRock launched the ETF, why it got classified as a commodity, because BlackRock wanted to get as much control power, then transition to the ETF, being able to stake. Once it stakes, it can then have its control and say over the network. And what is it doing? Well, it is working with a company that I invested in called Securitize in order to take its treasuries, i.e. government debt, wrap it up into a security token. I think about $1 billion has gone through that initial security token. And then you can take the tokens, which will be built on top of Ethereum, the stable coins built on top of Ethereum, and those that are staking it will receive the reward. And there is a race to try and control those stakes as well, because stakes mean control, unlike proof of work. Okay. So it will be controlled by those who own the stakes. And what we're seeing right now is even algorithmic stable coins like some of the BlackRock tokenized securities. And BlackRock have announced that in Texas, it will be launching its competing stock exchange. And it is highly likely that that competing stock exchange will be built upon top of Ethereum, so that the tokenized stable coins, the tokenized securities can all be put on top of Ethereum, so that when you buy your ETF, they can convert that so they own the stake and they can start staking. This is why you need to learn self-custody. This is why you need to learn, if you're going to be staking and you want your part of that network, that the real goal is to convert that stake into Bitcoin and get into the real network, which is the proof of do it legally and compliantly, so that you don't become that as possible and end up in self-custody. But anyway, the MakerDAO stablecoin, it has decided that there was an announcement that it would rebrand itself as Sky. And so they're going to launch a new algorithmic stablecoin where part of the reserves are backed by the BlackRock tokenized security, which is backed by US government debt. And they created a new stablecoin, which is called USDS, as part of the new branding. But the previous one, which is called a freeze function. A freeze function means that it can be frozen if the government, through subpoenas, decides that it has to be frozen. And so that is the only way to be able to comply with these algorithmic stable coins. And they put a decentralized layer or sticker. And so this feature, this regulatory compliance, this is what is going to be required. If you don't do it, you end up in prison. And so you just need to be aware of it so you can manage your risks and understand where the true freedom comes versus the fake freedom, as we saw by phonies, for example, Do Kwon, who ended up defrauding people out of over $40 billion by creating a fake central bank stablecoin and slapping a sticker on it, pretending it well. So just understand it is, and make sure you put together a plan to manage those as well, knowing that there is a freeze function, which is identical to your money at a bank, because your money at a bank, when you deposit at a bank, the bank becomes the legal owner of your money. And they can spend it as they choose, and they redirect. They can create money every time they issue a loan, which is the perpetuator of the Ponzi scheme, so that everybody loses their wealth through a hidden tax called inflation. You can own your own money without government, and you can beat inflation through its fixed monetary policy in order to combat and beat the system. Fiat currencies will always have their freeze function. Tether, they're the largest stablecoin. It's centralized. It has to comply with all of them in order to survive, which is why it is now the 18th largest lender to the US government, because eventually the bank Ponzi scheme blows up. We have this market where banks get wiped out from the middle, all end up owned by the Fed as well. Okay, speaking of which, we started to see more of the Binance boycotts, more and more accounts. So if, as a quick recap, I covered it last week if you didn't watch, but Binance went through a coup where the compliance department had to be taken over by the US Department of Justice to Palestine. And then they started to free those accounts. They came out and said it was limited to certain accounts, but more and more people started connecting. And now this week, more and more people from Turkey and various other regions have all said they froze my account too. They froze my account too. And more freezing funds have been frozen at the request of Israel, in order to where the US on the left hand is basically the compliance department. Obviously, Binance has to comply, but it is the US Palestinian accounts at Binance, and that's why we self-custody, because that is not Bitcoin. When you hold Bitcoin for a promise to repay a Bitcoin, and then that can be frozen in the middle, which is why you withdraw cold storage, self-custody, so that we can have as many people against these trends, including because it was originally started in China. And they put the founder in prison. He only served 4 months. Well, so what type of deal? Okay. If you didn't see it, by the way, if you want to go deeper into that topic, I uploaded and created a blog post on the Binance coup, and everyone that was involved in that. You can watch a recording. I put it on my blog on simondixon.com. Head over to the blog section and look thing. We also got some updates this week. So the Kraken case, full disclosure, I am a shareholder in Kraken through Bank to the Future, and so are other Bank to the Future investors that invested in Kraken in the early days. Their case with the SEC has gone into trial, so that is being put forward. And the judge has stated that crypto assets are not securities, which is similar to the Ripple case, but trades may be securities. So we'll get some more clarification. And then later, the US will put together its virtual asset service provider regime with Elizabeth Warren, who is trying to take away people's ability to self-custody in America and take away their freedom to own their own property as the Biden administration. And they engaged in Operation Choke Point 2.0 in order to take down all of the industry. It lost $2 billion from fraudsters that put together Ponzi schemes like Celsius and FTX. People lost their life savings. America didn't prevent it through effective regulations. And then they took down the banks so that TradFi could take over offering those services. And they did not protect Americans in any way, shape, or form, so that no one could get regulated, to allow the traditional financial institutions to take on the industry. Expect more of that, because Elizabeth Warren is paid for by the banking lobby, and the banking lobby wanted to get its grips into the industry and not take it down, which is why we resist central banking, lobby groups. The miners are banks that mine, digital currencies, that is backed by node operators, which is essentially bribing politicians like Elizabeth Warren, like the banking lobby, like the Israeli lobby, like the big pharma lobby, like the military industrial complex lobby that changes the laws in order to support those regimes and those schemes and export them globally through the economic hitmen at the IMF. And so Donald Trump came out that he has said America will put together a strategic reserve asset. He's working with RFK. And if you watch last week's video, I went through the detail of what I believe Americans need to do if they want to free themselves from the Fed and the different policies around that. We won't go into that again. But Trump, we don't believe him. But Trump says instead of attacking industries of the future, we will embrace them, including Bitcoin. And so you have to take it at face value, which essentially is a company I invested in early because I thought they were going to do something to disrupt SWIFT. They ended up becoming part of the establishment, and they used the XRP cryptocurrency to put 60% of the coins on its balance sheet. I'm still a shareholder in the company as a result from those early days, but I've been calling it out ever since. And people believe that buying this XRP cryptocurrency, they're actually making, and Ripple sells those tokens. They do them in compliance with securities laws. But the Ripple chairman, which is a implant from the banking lobby, Chris Larson, he endorsed the XRP lobby group, XRP cryptocurrency, which sits 60 years trying to do essentially what Maduro did with the Petro in a different form. And pretend that XRP is needed. Okay, hopefully you're starting to learn these tricks as well. At the same time, a company that I also invested in a while ago, Abra, they settled with them. They didn't admit it, but as a part of the settlement, earn yield off digital tokens through a centralized company like Abra. That is in fact a security, and that may have impact upon the fraudster that was siphoning off money to Israel through companies like Badger DAO that was invested by President Netanyahu's family that hacked 35,000 ETH from creditors and pensioners that the SEC allowed to invest into a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme called Celsius. And Majinsky came along as the front man and told everyone to take their money. He is facing 115 years. In his case, they have created a new company with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel, and they are creating AI companies and not facing any sentences because of their right to return, to avoid the fact that they cost billions of dollars to pensioners that have lost their lifetime savings as a result of this closer and closer. We also got some updates from FTX, from people take loads of money to engage in bribing the Dixon for 20 years. Probably get 11 years on good behavior, but the judge decided that there was no point looking into the political corruption. Only look into the political corruption with the Chinese government. Cases got dismissed, and the examiner report was just done on the Democrat and Republican parties. Has now, it looks like it's moving forward. There were no objections other than the SEC. What was the SEC's objection? The SEC's objection was, you can't pay them in crypto. We want you to do it through the inefficient proof of weapons network. And we managed to get it at Celsius that we could be paid in Bitcoin and ETH. It took a lot of lobbying effort, a lot of work. In fact, it cost me 2 years of my life in order to make sure that we kept our Bitcoin and ETH. And then that was what drove the recovery and things that people are very bored of hearing about right now. But that's going to be moving to the confirmation hearing in October. And the objection was from the SEC to paying in crypto. Hopefully you can fight the SEC, get your payment in crypto so that you can bring, it was meant to bring in about $16 billion into the crypto market, but they wanted to get that into the fiat market. And it looks like it's probably only going to be about 1.5 billion into the fiat market as a result of them selling off those assets at discount and using the bankruptcy code to steal the upside of the Bitcoin because they dollarized the claim and they used the shenanigans that I've covered many, many times. What else did we get in the Bitcoin side? Well, Qatar officially came out and introduced a new regulatory framework for digital assets. And so they're trying to build an industry there. and MasterCard, who had previously invested in Digital Currency Group, who defrauded Gemini and Genesis investors and created the GBTC way of getting into Bitcoin that was a precursor to the ETF, and also invested in Digital Currency Group, which invested in many other companies, is going to be launching its crypto debit card in Europe. The most important thing is that this allows people to take their crypto and they can spend it in what they said is a self-custodial wallet. I'll be very interested to see this, and I will analyze it further once I see that, because I don't know a way of taking a self-custodial wallet and you would have to connect it to the centralized network, which would mean you'd have to relinquish control of the private key through a smart contract. And then that would be something. So you only want to do that with a small amount of money. But I spent a lot of time where I lived off a Bitcoin debit card when I lived in Hong Kong. And it was very, very useful in order to be able to spend Bitcoin if your income comes in Bitcoin and use it through a debit card. But essentially, they want to bring crypto debit card reform that is required. Germany got it right. They said within 1 year, it is tax-free because it's treated like a currency. Portugal did a similar thing. This means it can be used as a currency without incurring a capital gain, which is a trick that America is using, where they say if you spend your Bitcoin, you create a taxable event. But if you put it on BlackRock and then put it into a wrapper like a Roth IRA, then you can defer your tax and you can spend your Bitcoin and you can treat it like an asset. Okay, well, I tell you what, I'm going to carry on covering the last bit of the crypto, and then maybe we'll do another part of the broadcast, and hopefully island internet will work a little bit better. Got the best internet the money can buy, a satellite on the side, but we still seem to have these issues. It is one of the perks of living in freedom to take on debt, which leads to a lot more peace and a lot less crime as well. Only when the Bank of England tries to interfere, when we try to turn it into Bitcoin Island, will remove clearing. But I believe that the island will be able to fight against that with the new technology and the new strategies that are being built. And so I'm going to end it here with just the end part of the Bitcoin stuff. If it is bad, I apologize, but hopefully we get it better. As I said, we were talking about the wallet being able to pull funds from self-custody. We shall see how it works. It is a nice convenience. And I was talking a little bit more about that as well. But the tax treatment is a very important part of that. And so legal tender as a currency rather than property, which allows you, So we're going to end at this point. I've covered all of my Bitcoin content. I do have the macro content and the geopolitical side. There was a lot covered to cover there because I feel like I'm talking and maybe people I'll listen back to it and we'll try and figure out how to get a better connection for next time. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. We're on the right side of this change. Make sure you got to log in at simondixon.com so I can help you transition from a world of Bitcoin AI into a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs, and make sure that we do that with peace, love, and unity.